What initiatives are in place to standardize medical cannabis licensing across Europe? Gabriel Micallef, Regulatory Affairs Hub.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining me. My name is Gabriel Micallef, representing Regulatory Affairs Hub, and I'm going to be talking to you about the standardization, the harmonization of regulatory affairs processes licensing cannabis-based medicines. Okay, so this is a European harmonization project. That's what I'm going to be talking to you about. So, yeah, this is the big question. What initiatives are in place to standardize cannabis-based medicines? I'll share something with you. I had a chat with a potential client of ours from Canada, and what he told me is, well, Europe is basically 28 countries, a number of countries with different rules, different regulations. It's like licensing in 28 different countries. My response? Well, yes and no. So I'm going to be talking to you about the no. I'm going to be talking to you about standardized, harmonized processes. So these are the topics. We'll start off with EU licensing procedures. So let's start from what is currently available. What is available not only for cannabis-based products, but also for any other pharmaceutical. You have the national process, the national route, where an applicant, a company, applies to a particular country. This country grants a license to market this product in that country. That is the one country submission method. That is well, it is discouraged in a way. It is not harmonized at all. It is one submission per country. Further on, a more harmonized approach is the MRP-DCP route. That is the mutual recognition or decentralized procedure route. Now, in this route, a number of countries join forces in reviewing, assessing, and granting a license for this particular product. An example of this was Sativex, which used this route to license its product in 2010. That is kind of a partially centralized procedure, partially harmonized, and partially national. It will have also a national phase at the end of the submission. The ultimate route, the ultimate harmonized way of licensing a product is the much coveted centralized procedure. Now this procedure is it's available for certain therapeutic areas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It basically is one submission to the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, and at the end of the assessment is licensed in all member states, in all EU countries, simultaneously at the end of it. And that is the ultimate licensing process, which is harmonized and at the end grants you a license for all markets. So let's talk a bit about the centralized procedure. So there are lots of advantages. The centralized procedure, it is quicker. You've got shorter timelines. It doesn't have a national phase. The EMA chooses to a rapporteur and a co-rapporteur to assist it in its assessment. It is granted one license throughout the EU, one number, and it is valid for all EU and EEA markets. It is cheaper. You have one central payment, much cheaper than applying for different agencies. And more importantly, companies can rely on special assistance from a conditional approval if they don't have enough studies or enough basis of data, to exceptional circumstances for rare indications. So how can a product be classed of a particular area to follow the centralized procedure? So it's mandatory for rare diseases, HIV, cancer, diabetes. Most importantly, it is mandatory for orphan. Now, to get an orphan designation, an orphan drug is a drug that has a limited amount of use in Europe. It has a limited therapeutic area for a limited amount of patients. So that is one of the main areas that cannabis-based products would fit into. They have a particular condition which is in less than 5 in 1,000 patients, and that is a valid point for it to apply for the centralized procedure. Yes, this is the orphan designation, as I was telling you about. It's for chronically debilitating or life-threatening conditions that affect less than 5 in 10,000 in the EU, and it is of significant benefit to those patients. The Epidiolex was actually licensed in this area. To get an orphan designation, there is an EU committee, the COMP, the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, which will assess whether this product can be classed as an orphan drug. Okay, so the centralized procedure has various steps. You have your submission, the review phase, the authorization, and then a renewal phase after the product has been licensed. Various timelines, various sections, but it is a streamlined process, very efficient, and again, it results in a license in all markets. Okay, let's talk about recent changes to the EU guidelines and structures. So, what is the problem exactly? There was, and in a way still is, a disjointed regulatory procedure only available at national level, unconventional regulatory schemes with less or medium importance to clinical trials, and again, different quality standards between different countries on manufacturing processes, different categories of what an active ingredient is and which class it falls into. So, what changed starting from, well, in the last 12 to 16 months, the European Monitoring Centre for Drugs and Addiction provided one of the first reports from an EU perspective on medicinal cannabis. It gave an accurate picture at the time of what is being developed, what are the pitfalls, what are the problems, effectively. In it, there was, again, a discussion on the need of harmonization of ingredients, the harmonization of routes of administration. That, again, is still converging to a harmonized definition. In February 2019, there was a resolution passed, the landmark resolution from the European Parliament to the European Commission to harmonize regulatory and legal framework regarding this licensing. It was based on scientific facts and a need for a common approach to license these products across Europe. And we had the first time the EMA granted a positive opinion for the cannabis-based medicine in July, and that was Epidiolex. So these are a number of milestones in the last, I would say, 12 months that have changed the landscape quite significantly in a short period of time. So again, a bit of history before that. You'd have products like Nabilone, which was licensed in 82, what's that, 37 years ago. It was licensed for the control of nausea and vomiting caused by chemotherapy. You had Dronabinol, again, made by prescription in Germany, Bedrocan, Sativex, licensed in Europe in a number of countries via the MRP DCP procedure. That was by GW Pharma. Tilray products, again, awarded a number of GMP licenses to export countries in the EU. And Epidiolex from last July, receiving a positive opinion on 2 rare conditions of childhood epilepsy. So these are an overview of the last few landmarks. There are others, but these seem to be relevant for this topic. So, okay, let's see challenges. What are the challenges for further harmonization? So the main issue is that as this potential client mentioned, there are national reservations. Individual members have different histories, they have different attitudes and views towards this market, and they can make it hard to place the product on the market at a national level. The various countries' national health service can be an inhibiting factor. For example, health services can decide that from a cost-benefit ratio, it is not as effective as other medicines on the market, other drugs on the market, which target the same condition. So it might be licensed in the UK or whichever country, but then NICE would decide, you know what, we can't really put it on the NHS, so the access to this drug is very limited. So that's another hurdle. And in my view, one of the biggest ones of them all is the medical community's acceptance is relatively low. If you don't have doctors believing, doctors, pharmacists, anyone in the life sciences world, if they don't have professionals believing in it, prescribing it, dispensing it, understanding its use, then it will never become a mainstream drug used for different conditions. And the medical community is still skeptical because there are very few studies or moderate amount of studies proving quality, safety, and efficacy. The more that changes, the more you get buy-in from professionals, and that is what the industry needs in a nutshell. Clinical trials are usually hard to perform. It's hard to actually pick patients and perform a clinical trial when a drug is not that used, it's not refined, it's not to particular quality standards. So its availability for clinical trials is not so widespread. It is increasing, but it is still at an initial stage. This was an excerpt from the EMCDDA report saying, look, these are the conditions, these are the symptoms, these are the products which we have currently being tested, and this is the strength of evidence. And again, limitations on what is the problem. So this report highlighted the limitations for clinical trials, science-based evidence to bring products from a licensing perspective on the market. Okay, for example, just to give you a good example of Nabilone. So Nabilone, as I said, first licensed in the early 80s. Since then, a number of companies applied for a license, 1995 and 2007 in the UK. The MHRA declares benefit outweighs the risk. The MHRA is the UK agency for licensing medicines. Every country would have a licensing agency. When a company decided to go through the centralized route, through the orphan designation, a company called MRN GmbH, it's an Austrian company, it received a negative opinion. So moving from a nation-based license to an EU common framework got stuck. So there was not enough data for the condition they were applying for, and it was not able to be used for the centralized procedure. Okay, my topic was about Europe, and there is more to Europe besides the EU. Being in the UK, we had this discussion quite prominently. There's more to Europe besides the EU. And yeah, the EU is a big market. It is very much harmonized, but there are other areas in Europe which are up and coming and are seeking more and more harmonization. A quick excerpt. Russia and the rest of the Russian Commonwealth, Turkey, Ukraine, the Balkans, all have their different stages of acceptance of regulatory procedures and harmonization. Many of them do follow or do look up to what Europe is doing, what European standards are. For example, the Balkans are classed as EU followers. They follow, again, licensing procedures from the EU. So there is an element of following the EU procedures and licensing processes. If Europe takes the first step ahead, then there'll be other countries that follow. And finally, some opportunities, something to think about in the future. with time, there'll be more clinical trials, there'll be more science-based evidence, there'll be more evidence for other companies to draw on when making their application. It is important that there is a body of evidence to support the conditions you're applying for. The medical community as well will be more accepting based on studies, based on results. And the more it is used, the more it is licensed across Europe, the more you can have a safety profile. All adverse events can be reported. You have your PSUR system of reporting of adverse events. You can collate a benefit-risk analysis of the product. And again, more patients use it, and that evidence can be supported, can support future licenses of other products. So it's all good news. It's moving towards the convergence of harmonized procedures and drawing of data, of trials, studies, which can be used, which can be quoted by other companies. It is a community that kind of inadvertently helps itself. So this is my final message, and I'd like to leave you with that thought, that as time goes by, there's more harmonization, there are more vehicles where the licensing processes can be unified, can be harmonized. So that is good news, and I'll leave you with that note. Thank you very much. Feel free to join us on LinkedIn. Thank you.